All right, great. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. This is the fourth and last class tonight. I'm sorry it's over so soon. Oh, you clapping because it's over? But anyway, I'm really glad that you came tonight. We have a really good program for you tonight. We're going to talk about fruits and vegetables, vegetables and herbs with Aunt Urich. She's going to give you an overview of the specifics of each type of plant. We're also going to have a presentation on container gardening, because even though you have your raised beds, you may also want to expand your garden by doing some gardening in containers, and we're going to show you how to do that tonight. We're also going to have a talk on tools and tool care, how to keep your tools for a long time so that they will give you good use and they will be properly sharp and you won't hurt yourself. And then we're going to have a presentation on edible landscaping for your home. And then finally, I'm going to give you a class overview of all four classes, very briefly, but just to kind of review of everything we've learned so far. At the end, we're going to collect your little surveys that we've given you. We'd like you to give us feedback on how we can make this experience better for the next group of students that are going to be taking this class. So if you have suggestions, things that we can do better, please let us know. We appreciate that. Also, we're going to have at the very end, if you've attended all four classes, you're going to get a graduation certificate tonight. Yay! Do you have a question? No. Okay. If you didn't sign in on one of the weeks, but you did come to all four classes, please see Tova during the break, because then she'll add you to the list of people that get the graduation certificate. We only could go by if you signed in on the sheet, okay? So that's what our criteria was. I've also given you one of these sheets tonight. A couple students from last week told me that the phone number that was on the paper I originally gave you didn't work. I gave you the wrong phone number. I am sorry. This one has the correct phone number, so throw the other sheet of paper away. What you will get if you call this number is an answering machine. The answering machine you can leave a message, you leave your name, you leave your phone number, you leave your email address, and you leave your question. It'll take them about 2 days to get back to you, but they will answer your gardening questions. If you give them an email address, they will write it out for you in Spanish and send it back to you if you need it that way. So please request in Espanol if you need that. If you want it in English, they will do that as well. Okay? So this is the correct number. I apologize for giving you the wrong number. Okay, first up tonight, oh, by the way, we brought cupcakes for everybody. We have a huge amount of vanilla cupcakes, so please enjoy. Our first speaker tonight is Ann Urich. Take it away, Ann.
Hi, I'm going to be talking to you about the vegetables and herbs today. And it's just going to be a slideshow, and I'm just going to read from my notes a little bit about each one, just to give you an idea of what they are, and basically how to grow them and when to plant them, so that you know when to start these vegetables for yourself. Okay, so the first one is asparagus.
Let me get the light for you, Ann.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
This is a perennial, which means that it will come back year after year. It should last anywhere from 5 to 10 years. It will keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it will be producing more and more tender shoots, which is what you'll harvest. It needs full sun, it needs a lot of organic soil, and it needs really good drainage. You need to use organic mulches on top of the plants, about 4 to 6 inches deep, to provide nutrients and to retain moisture, and to help control weeds. You need to water frequently until the plant begins to develop, and then water deeply 1 to 2 times a week. Whether you plant your asparagus from seeds or from root crowns that have already been established with roots, remember you'll have to be patient and don't plan on harvesting for at least 2 years after you plant. If you plant with seeds, it will take 3 years before you can harvest. If you plant with a root crown, it will take 2 years. And your first harvest, you can harvest from 4 to 6 weeks, and then you need to stop. When the shoots start to come up and they're thin and spindly, that's when you know that you should stop, because the roots are being drained and they need time to build their energy again and start producing. So when you cut them with a knife at the base, and you cut at an angle so that you don't cut the tips off by accident of any other shoots that are coming up. So you just cut at an angle, each one individually. And in your second season, which is usually your third year, you can harvest for 8 to 10 weeks, which is a lot better, 4 to 6. one is artichoke, which, I mean, I know when I planted, I just let it flower because the flowers are so gorgeous. But this is a perennial. Also, it's going to keep coming out year after year for about 3 to 5 years. And you need to thin it out every couple of years because it'll start sending out shoots and it'll get overcrowded. So you do need to thin it out. They can grow from 3 to 5 feet tall, and they can grow just as wide. You can plant artichokes just like asparagus from seed or from crowns, which are just already established plants, and you can get those in a nursery or a seed catalog. They require well-drained soil, plenty of organic matter, and deep mulching, full sun, in an area where there isn't a lot of foot traffic. You don't want to compact the soil so that the roots can't grow out because the roots grow close to the surface. It has a deeper root at the base of the plant, but the other roots grow around the top of the surface. So you don't want to compact them. And again, you want to deep mulch. Well, you cut it off at the stem. Here, let me find the right button. You cut it off at the stem, right about there, at an angle. And you take a knife and you cut off these leaves right around here. And you can also dig out the choke, which is inside. It's like little hairy things. You dig that out, and then you cut the tips. These little tips right here. You just snip those off all around, and you take a knife and just slice the top off right there, and you steam them. You just steam it with water. You can put lemon and basil. You can put salt and pepper in the water. You can put whatever herbs and spices in the water. And you cook it, depends on the size of your artichoke, but if it's a full-grown artichoke, you'll want to cook it for anywhere from 20 minutes to 40 minutes. If you're going to pick them when they're young, and they're softer and more tender, you can eat more of the artichoke. You slice it off again like this, but you can cut it in half and dig out the choke, which is the hairy part, and you can then quarter it, you can stir fry it, or you can cook it in a steamer also. They're really good. Yeah, you're welcome. Also remember, the younger the bud, the more edible it is. If you eat it when it's full grown like that, you basically get a little bit of the meat at the base of the leaf. But if you eat it when it's just a baby, you can eat pretty much all of it, and it's very good, and it's good for you. And so throughout the life of the plant, which, as I said, can be anywhere from 3 to 5 years, depending on where you planted it and how well you've been able to take care of it, you just need to remember to mulch it and put fresh compost, dig fresh compost in every year, and it'll be fine. Is basil. I think we all know basil, right? Basil is an annual, which means you need to plant the seeds every year. You can buy them in nurseries and probably the market. You can buy them, and they're in a pot. They're more fully grown, but you can plant them from seeds directly into the soil that you've amended. You can plant them in the early spring until the fall. The only thing you need to be careful with is that even though it requires full sun, when it gets really hot here in this part of the valley particularly, I know I always have a problem. I need to always move mine to a place that gets partial shade, which is fine. They'll still grow in partial shade. If you see it, this one right here has this little growth right here. Sometimes they'll start to send up a flower spike. When you see that, you want to pinch it off and dispose of it, because if it starts to flower, that means it's going to seed. And all the energy of the plant is going into producing seed and not producing the leaves, which is what you really want to be harvesting to use for pesto or just for anything you would use basil for. Occasionally it needs fertilizer. It's not really fertilizer heavy, but it does require a little fertilizer once in a while. And I just usually use diluted fish emulsion, and I use compost tea. And I noticed when I was making my notes for most of these things that that's usually what I use, is fish emulsion and compost tea. And again, just use heavy mulch, and it should be fine. It needs full sun, 6 to 8 hours, and as I said, can tolerate partial shade. If you're going to keep it in planters, remember that it's going to dry out a lot faster, so you'll have to water it a lot more frequently. they do require consistent watering. You don't have to water them every day, but keep an eye on them. If they start to look wilting, then you do want to be sure and water it thoroughly and deeply. And they'll grow really fast in 80 to 90 degree weather, but the problem with that is that they will start to bolt sooner, so we want to put them in a little more shade, because again, bolting means that they're reaching the end of their life because they're going to start releasing seed. The next one up is broccoli. It's a cool season annual, which means you can plant it in the spring and in the fall here from seed, or you can buy transplants at the nursery. It requires full sun and moist, fertile soil that's slightly acidic. You need to sow the seeds outdoors in early spring so that the plant will mature before the weather warms up. If it gets too hot, the broccoli will immediately bolt and flower, and then it won't produce anymore. Broccoli is a heavy feeder, so you need to fertilize 3 weeks after you transplant it, or after it's started to grow and it's about 4 to 6 inches tall, and then throughout the growing season. Provide consistent soil moisturizer with regular watering, especially when it gets really hot here in the valley. You need to make sure that the ground is always moist. And be sure that you don't get the leaves wet or the top, the budding head, because that will stunt the growth of the head, and the head is what you're going to harvest, so you don't want to do that. And also, when you're mulching, as with most things, you don't want to get the mulch up against the stem of the plant where the root is, because that can encourage pests. You can have mealy bugs in the garden, you can have cutworms. There's a lot of things that would eat into the stem, so you want to make sure that your mulch doesn't go right up to the stem. It's important though, because it's going to retain moisture and it's going to keep the soil temperature cooler as opposed to being hot out in the sun. So that will be helpful, and it will also keep down weeding. You harvest broccoli and the buds of the head are firm and tight, like these are right here. You can see that that's a bud right there, and it's firm. It hasn't started to flower. If it's flowering, you see little tiny yellow flowers. If you see that, harvest it immediately, because it's not going to be very good very long. And also, you don't want to encourage the rest of the plant to flower, so get it off as soon as possible. For the best results, harvest your broccoli in the morning before the soil heats up. The plant won't go through as much transition if you cut it off early. If you cut it off later, then the plant will be in shock and it will take it a little longer to recover. When you cut the heads off, you want to cut them about 6 inches down the stalk of the main head, again at a slant like you did with the asparagus. And most varieties of broccoli, once you cut this off, they'll send up little shoots around the side, and you'll have more broccoli production. It won't be as big as the main one that you cut off, but you'll continue to have broccoli coming up for the whole season. You can generally harvest one plant for many weeks unless the summer is too hot. Next is cabbage. You see there's many different kinds of cabbage. It's grown as a cool season annual. They're very heavy feeders, and they do require fertile soil enriched with a good compost or a balanced organic fertilizer. Work amendments into the soil before you plant and make sure that you watered well. You can plant the cabbage seeds, or again, you can buy transplants at your nursery. The seeds can be sown directly into the amended soil. They take full sun, but in very hot summer temperatures like we have here, they do require partial shade in the afternoon. In hot weather, like 80 to 90, 100 degrees like we get here, the plant will bolt and go to seed again. It'll start to go to seed, and you want to cut that off. But try and catch it as soon as you can to encourage it to keep producing the vegetable and not the seeds. They need constant moisture, so lightly spray the plant in the early morning. The reason is for this is that you don't want to do it in the evening when the leaves don't have a chance to dry off. If they're not dry, they'll start to develop powdery mildew and they'll attract insects and that will ruin your crop. They grow best during the cool weather. So for here, you plant them in the early spring, as soon as you could start working in your soil, like maybe end of January, early February, you want to start planting them. They can be harvested when they reach the desired size that you want, but they'll also hold the garden after they reach maturity. You can slow the maturity of your cabbages by pruning the roots, and the way you would do this is you would take a spade and you would dig down the outside of the cabbage and you'd be cutting the roots off. So it wouldn't be spreading anymore. It would encourage it to stop growing. So it would maintain that size for you anyway. The next step is cantaloupe. Cantaloupe melons are annuals. You plant the seeds every year. They require the warmest, sunniest spot in your garden, and they benefit from a flat plastic mulch under them, which would be like black plastic bag. And the reason that they require that is they need warm soil. So the heat would retain the black plastic would retain the heat, and it would radiate it up to the roots of the plant. I don't know that we have that as such a big problem here, but you might want to consider it. They also require a light, well-drained soil, amended with compost, and really importantly, every 2 to 3 months, they need heat, not just sun. So you can plant them out in the sun, but remember that they need to have heat on their roots also, that the whole area needs to be warm. So if you have a lot of weeds, make sure that you do weeding around, and don't put them around a lot of shrubs or plants that have big leaves. Like you wouldn't want to put it around your artichoke plant because it gets big and leafy and it would cover the soil, so your cantaloupes wouldn't be warm enough. Water is also very important. They need a steady supply of water. The vines are sensitive to drought when they're young and until the fruits start to form. So try and keep the soil consistently moist but not waterlogged. Don't soak it. And most times spraying, a light spraying is much better than just taking your hose and soaking it. It needs a slow, steady stream of water. In warm weather, once the plants start to set their fruit, they should be watered uniformly 3 times a week. Drying out will cause your fruit to split, which nobody wants. But avoid overhead watering. Like again, I think with most anything that we've been talking about, overhead watering will cause powdery mildew, and you'll have other fungus diseases in your garden. So you want to avoid evening watering, and you want to avoid watering overhead. So water the vines in the early morning, and that way your leaves are dry. During the time between transplanting and when the first flowers open, use a fertilizer with more nitrogen than phosphorus and potassium. But once the flowering begins, use a fertilizer with less nitrogen and more phosphorus and potassium. This would be a fertilizer that you would use maybe for African violets, that kind of combination. For vines running on the ground, unless you put them on trellises, if you have them on the ground, so you want to keep the fruit from having direct contact with the soil. You see in this picture, there's a can, like an old coffee can under the cantaloupe. That's to keep it from the ground where it would spoil, it would mold, and it would attract bugs that would eat it. And another thing to remember is if you have raccoons or any critters that want to eat your fruit, you want to put maybe a milk crate over your cantaloupe and put bricks or rocks on it to keep them from getting to your fruit so you have it. You can tell that when your cantaloupes are ripe by one of 2 ways. First of all, they'll separate from the vine on their own, or the yellow-orange flesh of the cantaloupe will start right, the pretty orange color will start to show through, so you'll know that they're ready to be harvested. So next up is cauliflower. Cauliflower is an annual, which again means to be planted every year. It's a cool season crop, and for us here in Southern California, the very best time to plant cauliflower is early in the spring because it loves cool weather. It doesn't do well in our heat. The trick to growing it is just the consistently cool temperatures. So like in Northern California, they grow beautifully. It also needs a rich soil, a steady supply of water and nutrients, and at least 6 full hours of sun every day. So no shade at all, but sun for at least 6 hours a day. And more is better. It also needs fertile, well-drained, moist soil with plenty of rich organic matter. You need to add nutrient-rich amendments such as blood meal, cottonseed meal, or composted manure to the soil thoroughly before you plant your seeds. Cauliflower likes temperatures that are in the 60s. And in young cauliflower plants, there is a fine balance between leaf and head growth. So if you stress the plant out, if it's too hot and it has this sense of imbalance, then it'll start to produce tiny button head sized cauliflowers. And that's pretty much when it stops growing. It's not going to grow a big head anymore. So you want to be really careful. It's a very sensitive plant. It kind of takes a lot of time. And this will also happen if you buy transplants in 6-packs. If you let them sit in the 6-pack for too long before you plant it, this will also happen. When the cauliflower head's about 2 inches wide, you can pull the leaves up over the little heads. You see how big the leaves are? You can pull the leaves up over the heads, and you can put them together with a clothespin or a piece of twine. Usually it'll do that itself, but that will keep, like the white heads, it will keep them white. It's called self-blanching, but oftentimes they don't do it, so you just want to be sure. Sometimes they'll come up, but you'll just need to clip them together. And sometimes they need a little bit of help. Eggplant is the next one. Eggplant is another really beautiful landscaping plant, that and asparagus, because they have such beautiful flowers and the fruits are so beautiful. It's an annual. You can, again, plant it from seed, or you can plant it with transplants in the early spring, and they're ready to bloom and set fruit in the summer. They need full sun, well-drained locations. They also require soil that has been genuinely enriched with compost. It's a good idea to provide a generous mulch of hay, shredded leaves, or other biodegradable material to keep the soil evenly cool and to hold the moisture and keep down the weeds. They grow into tall, angular plants, so they should be spaced apart, maybe 24 to 36 inches. Fertilize the holes and then put your plant in. After you plant them, cover the soil with mulch and be sure to keep the plants watered. Otherwise, your fruits will be small and bitter, which nobody wants. They need a nice, steady supply of moisture, but not so much, again, like the soil gets soggy. You may also want to put stakes into the ground when you first plant them, because when the plant grows and it sets its fruit, it's going to start to topple over. So if you put the stakes in the ground when you plant, you're not going to disturb the roots once the plant starts to grow. The fruits should be cut from the stem rather than pulled, and they'll produce more fruits if you pick them regularly. They can be harvested when they're young, so they'll be little tiny eggplants. And those could just be stir-fried. They're really tender and good. Or you can wait, that's about the size of a golf ball. Or you can wait till they're mature and you can harvest them. And an average plant will yield 6 to 8 fruits per plant a year. Lettuce is an annual, it's a cool season crop. So it's best to begin sowing in early spring and continue to sow every 10 days, so you can have successive plants growing all season long. You can plant them from early spring till midsummer when the temperatures get too high. Depending on the variety of seed that you're planting, they'll need moderate sun, partial shade. They need loose, well-drained soil, light feeding, and frequent watering. The plants need to be regularly sprayed in the early morning, and a deep watering twice, maybe 3 times a week, depending on the heat. Sow on open ground and continue sowing at 10-day intervals, starting as soon as the soil begins to warm. When the weather starts to get hot, the plants will bolt, again, meaning they're going to go to seed. And that's why you want to make successive planting. So once those start to bolt, you can pull those out, but you'll have new ones coming out. You want to begin planting again in the fall after the heat of summer. And lettuce is very easy to grow when it has those requirements met. It just needs a slightly alkaline soil with compost added, regular moisture, and light feedings of a diluted fish emulsion type fertilizer. There's many varieties of lettuce, so you want to check the back of the seed packets and make sure that you're getting one that's going to grow in this area. Something that's easier for us to grow are the loose leaf lettuces, not like iceberg lettuce. That's very difficult to grow here because it gets too hot. But if you grow things like butter crunch lettuce or bib leaf or oak leaf, you'll have much more success with that. We have green beans, also known as snap beans or string beans. They're annual. They need full sun and good soil. These seeds have to push up through the soil. The seed leaves have to push up through the soil, so you want to make sure that the soil is reasonably worked and tilled and reasonably soft. It's not heavy, just loose without rocks or big clods of dirt to prevent the roots, the shoots from coming up. They grow as either self-supporting bushes, which are called bush beans, or they're climbing vines, which are called pole beans. Bush bean types bear fruit earlier, but the ones that you plant from seeds, the vines, are much more productive. So it just depends on what kind of plant you want, the production you want, and the kind of space that you have. The vines will grow up a trellis. You can either put bamboo stakes in the ground or just stakes in the ground and run twine between them and plant the seeds, and they'll grow up that trellis by themselves. Or you can put 4 or 5 stakes together and tie them up at the top like a teepee, and plant maybe 6 to 8 seeds around each stake, and then thin them to about 3 or 4 of the strongest ones. And those will grow up and make a teepee. If any of you have kids, children love to play in there, so that's a fun thing to do with them. Feed once after the plants are in active growth, and then feed again when pods start to form. When the beans are mature, begin harvesting every 5 to 7 days. If you leave the pods on the plant, it'll go to seed, so you really do have to harvest this, and so it'll continue bearing new pods. Onions are biennials grown as annuals. They're grown from any one of these 3 stages. They can be grown from seeds, from seedlings, or from dormant bulbs. And this is how you can choose the ones that you want. Sets are small dormant bulbs that grew from seeds the previous season. Seeds are the way to grow the widest variety of onions because they are first-year plants. They will make large bulbs. Seedlings are plants that were started from seed in this current season. You can purchase these in bunches from mill or the nurseries, or in multi-packs from garden centers. And because they are first-year plants, you can expect large bulbs. Onions require full sun, well-composted soil with good drainage, regular water, and because they are shallow-rooted, they need moisture fairly near the surface. Be sure to mulch, which will help retain the moisture in the soil. And again, keep weeds from growing. Be sure to feed the plants, especially early in the season. Again, I use diluted fish emulsion. The larger and stronger the plants grow on top, so the larger and stronger the stalks are, or the leaves, those fronds, the bigger and hardier your bulb is going to be. When most of the tops have begun to turn yellow, So when these start to turn yellow, you want to fold them over and let them dry out. And it's like 3 to 4 days, and then you want to dig the bulbs and cut the tops off and put them in a cool, dry place to cure. Then you can cut off the tops and clean them and store them. So we have peas. We have parsley. Now we have peas. Peas are cold season annual. They require full sun, coolness, and humidity, which is difficult to achieve here. We have to plant these early in the season, again, early spring, so mid to late January if the ground is warm enough. And just like beans, they come in bush and vine varieties. It depends on the amount of space you want to allocate for your peas. For vining peas, you can use the same suggestions as for the vining beans. They need non-acid soil, and they'll retain moisture and provide good drainage. They need to be planted as soon as the ground temperature warms up. Moisten the soil thoroughly before planting, and don't water again until the seedlings have broken through the surface. These are kind of like beans in that if you water, that compacts the soil. It makes it more difficult for the little seed to push the first set of roots up through the soil. So you want to be sure not to water it until it has emerged from the soil. Successive plantings, several days apart, will lengthen the bearing season. But don't plant so late in the summer that the heat will overtake the ripening pods and they will just die. Most varieties are ready to bear in 60 to 70 days. Peas need very little fertilizer, and as long as the soil has been prepared with a good compost, just give them one application of a monthly fertilizer and they'll be fine. Next up is peppers. Peppers are annuals, planted every year from seed. A warm weather crop needing full sun, but it will tolerate some shade. They need well composted soil, deep watering, and feeding before the plant starts to bloom. Keep the plants well mulched and watch for snails and slugs and cutworms when the plants are young. They blossom early in the summer, and the fruit are ready to harvest in mid to late summer. They need a long growing season, 120 days, from the time you plant until the time that you can expect to harvest. Sweet peppers, like bell peppers, here, those can be picked when they're green or red, yellow or orange. You can pick them once they reach their color. Chili peppers, or hot peppers, should be allowed to ripen completely while they're on the plant. Hot temperatures and bright sunlight are how to grow chili peppers that sizzle and are hot. In general, the longer a hot pepper remains on the plant, the more capsicum it will manufacture. However, you can't expect to turn jalapeno into a habanero by leaving it on the plant longer. You can't change that, but you can maximize its heat by waiting until it matures. Hot peppers growing in cool climates or short summers tend to be milder, so they're not going to be as hot. And also, if you grow them in shade or if you grow them under shady bushes, they're not going to be as hot. They'll still be good, but they won't be as hot. Next up is potatoes. Potatoes are a tuberous rooted perennial, and they're treated as an annual. You don't plant them every year, but if you leave some in the ground, they will sprout a new potato plant. If they have green skin and the raw shoots, that is toxic. That's poisonous. Be sure not to eat that. They require rich organic sandy loam and in an area in the garden with good drainage. Once planted, water the potatoes regularly to keep the soil evenly moist. Potatoes need at least 1 inch of water per week. And like the other plants, water them early in the morning to allow the leaves to dry quickly, and it reduces the opportunity for disease. Be sure to add compost to the soil and dig it in well. And after planting, cover the top with mulch. For early crops, plant in spring, and as soon as the soil starts to warm up. Above the ground, you'll see the potato plant, which will be green. It'll have big leaves, very similar to a tomato plant, and they're divided. But under the ground is where your tubers are going to be growing. You want to carefully dig the earliest ones. I mean, you can dig anytime you want. Once they start to ripen, you can dig them. So if you're getting new potatoes, or you can wait later and you'll get bigger potatoes, the more mature potatoes. You can store them in a dark place once you harvested them. Or here in our climate, because it's warm, you can leave them in the ground until the end of the season and store them in the ground. At that point, you want to be sure you get them all up, because if you don't, next spring you'll start growing new potatoes, but they won't be as big as these original potatoes. Each year they'll start to get smaller and smaller. To save garden space, potatoes can be grown in baskets and barrels or stacked old tires if you want. You would fill the first tire with well-composted soil and your potatoes. Put a tire on top of that, and as the plant grows, fill it with more soil. So the plant will grow up, you would stack more tires, fill it with more soil, and you would be growing more potatoes all the way up. The only thing you have to remember with container planting of anything is that they're going to dry out sooner. And in tires, they're going to get hot, so you want to make sure that they're well watered. Next up, we have pumpkins or squash. They're an annual vine. They require full sun. And if you plant your pumpkins in an area where you previously had a garden or you've grown vegetables or flowers, you've really worked the soil enough to plant pumpkins. They're very hardy. You don't have to be as careful, but you do want to make sure that there is something previously grown there that was disease-free for sure. You have to also research the kind of pumpkin you want to plant. You know, you can get pumpkins that grow to be 1,000 pounds, which are huge and would overtake your garden, to the little mini ones that you can buy in the market. So just make sure that you read the back of the packets or your books that you have and decide what you want from your pumpkin so that you be sure to plant the right kind of pumpkin and you have the proper area for it. So the area that you choose for whatever size pumpkin you have, you need to make sure that it has really good drainage. Raised beds are great because raised beds have very good drainage. If you plant, generally you want to plant between late May and late June. If you plant later in June, your pumpkins aren't going to be ready for Halloween. Most pumpkin varieties take, from the time you plant them till the time they mature, 85 to 125 days to mature. Because they are 80 to 90% water already, you only need to water them when they really need it. Check the soil, and as long as the moisture is good and your plant looks happy, you can just leave it alone. You just kind of go off of the plant. If it looks like it's starting to wilt and it's not looking happy, water it. But water it from the bottom. Again, you don't want to water from the top, and it gets a powdery mildew on your leaves. You want to soak it from the bottom so that the water gets into the whole root base. Your pumpkins will store longer if you stop watering them 7 to 10 days before you harvest. And the way you know that your pumpkins are ready to harvest is if you push your thumb or your finger into the flesh of the pumpkin and the depression of your fingertip stays there, then you know that the pumpkin is ready to harvest. If it's still hard, then leave it. It's too soon. It's too soon for you to pick it. And then to harvest your pumpkins, you want to harvest them, you want to cut them off the vine. It's always better to cut maybe 4 to 6 inches of the stem so that you have that for your pumpkin. Be sure you don't carry it by that because it'll snap off, but try and give it enough of the stem when you cut it. Next up is radishes. Radishes are great to grow because they reach maturity really fast. So it's one of the earliest things you can plant in your garden and actually harvest. They need continuous moisture. They need full sun, light shade. The supply of nutrients blended into the compost before you plant or liquid fertilizer. You can sow the seed directly into the soil in the spring. All right, I'm just going to go directly to, here we are. I'm just going to go directly to tomatoes, because that will be my last one. Because I think everyone knows tomatoes, and there's so much, it's fine. And there's so much information on tomatoes, so I'm trying to consolidate, but tomatoes are probably one of the most popular vegetable crops that we have. The taste and the texture and the easiness that we can grow them. You can grow them upside down in containers. You can grow them as a bush, or you can grow them on a big trellis. You can grow them in cages. They're kind of an amazing plant, and it depends on what you like to do with them. But you can bake cakes with them. There's tomato cake. You can use it for salsa, you can use it for tomato sauce, you can slice them for sandwiches. There's two kinds. There's the determinate variety. It grows to a certain size and then it stops growing and it suddenly produces a lot of tomatoes. And when we had our master preserver here the other day, that's the type of tomato she was explaining. You want to make sure you know what you're going to do with it. If you're going to can it, if you're going to freeze it, if you're just going to make up a bunch of tomato sauce all at once, that's the kind of tomato that you want for that. The indeterminate variety keeps on growing and sprawling and getting bigger and growing all over your garden. But you can pinch the back and kind of control that. And that will just give you a harvest of tomatoes continually throughout the season. They just take up much more space. They need a lot of water. They need well composted soil. I think watering properly is probably, and consistently, is probably one of the most important keys to being successful with your tomatoes. Plant tomato seeds directly in the ground or by transplants anywhere from February through the end of March. Choose a very sunny location. They need 6 to 8 hours of direct sun, not just shaded or not partial, but direct sun. Prepare the soil with compost and be sure to water frequently while the plants are starting to grow. Once they start to develop fruit, water less so that the tomatoes won't have a watered down taste to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, very much. That's a lot of information packed in there. That's amazing. Does anyone have any questions for Anne about the vegetables that she was talking about? Yes.
Mi pregunta es, en el invierno, ¿qué clase de vegetales podemos producir?
During the winter, what type of vegetables can we grow?
Unless we have a frost, we can still grow carrots and radishes and lettuce. Sometimes basil will grow into the winter, but it needs a lot of light. So I think pretty much you're kind of down to those radishes, carrots, and that last one I mentioned. Lettuce. Yes, lettuce you can keep growing all season. Just not that hot part of summer.
I actually get my best crops for broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, lettuce in the winter time. There's less bugs, the temperature is milder, they grow really well in the winter time. I had a much better crop for broccoli and cauliflower and all that in the winter than I get in the spring. So don't be afraid to try it. Start planting about September, October, and just keep planting. We're going to talk about succession planting in the next presentation, or the second to the next presentation. But the point is, keep growing even in the winter months. We are fortunate in Southern California that we can grow all year long here. So there's no seasons. Like if you live in New York, there's a definite beginning and end to your growing season. We don't have that here. We grow all year long, every day. Something can be grown. Okay? Okay, our next speaker that's up, this is Alyssa Kahn. and she is going to talk to you about growing in containers. It's a wonderful way to expand your garden. Take it away, Alyssa.
So there are some different reasons why you might want to garden in containers.
They're helping.
Particularly if you have a lack of space. So here somebody has put containers with different fruits and vegetables on their roof. And in this case, somebody has a small backyard that doesn't have grass on the ground or dirt where they can plant. So they planted in containers different fruits and vegetables. There are 7 major considerations in container gardening. The first is how much sun is available. Most vegetables need 6 to 8 hours of sun a day. Particularly flowering vegetables such as tomatoes, peppers, or eggplants need a lot of sun, so placing them facing south or west is best. Leafy vegetables such as lettuce, onions, and carrots and beets will do okay in pots that are facing east, so that get morning sun but less sun in the afternoon. And in the north gets the least amount of sun, but pots that are facing north, you can have succulents or flowers or other fruits and vegetables that don't require a lot of sun. So the second consideration is what kind of container. Almost any container will work as long as it has good drainage. Smaller containers dry out very quickly in the summer, so you may have more success with a larger container. This container is made out of wood, so it's very breathable, and also it's elevated from the ground, so it has room to drain. Drainage is very important. So drainage is very important. If you have something like plastic, you want to have holes in the bottom so that it can drain. And here it's on rocks so that it's elevated and the water can come out of it. If something is on concrete or asphalt, it should be raised up like this one here so that the water can come out. Another very important aspect is depth, how deep the container is, because the deeper the container, the more water it can absorb and the deeper the roots can grow. So when it's very hot in the summer, the roots can search deeper for moisture and for water and nutrients. So the deeper the container, the better in hot summers, especially like we have here in California. In general, containers should all be 4 inches deeper than the deepest root. And since most plants in containers are above ground, the roots are very sensitive to temperature extremes. The heat can kill the roots. So the best thing to do is in the summer especially to put it on a saucer like this, a plate underneath it so that it can absorb the water that collects underneath. It reabsorbs into it. And in the winter we want to remove it so that it's not sitting in the water because that can also rot the roots, everything. Wood like this is very good for insulation, and as I said, it's also good for drainage. And let's see. So again, the deepest container available is very important for the roots so that they can grow deeper. And if you're going to recycle containers, because plants can be planted in just about anything, it's important to clean them before you use them. So they should be rinsed out with a solution that is 9 parts water, 1 part bleach. Also, if containers are made out of clay, or something like wood as well, they should be soaked before you plant in them so that they don't suck all of the water out of the plant. So So the third consideration is what should you plant in your containers? Shallow-rooted crops like herbs, lettuce, green onions, radishes, and spinach are best. So here we have basil and arugula and some other kind of herb, I believe, and green onions. So these all do very well because they have a more shallow root system. Here somebody has planted, looks like beans, basil, strawberries, other herbs. There's lavender and thyme. Root vegetables such as carrots, potatoes, and turnips and other root crops need much deeper containers so that their roots can develop. Again, you want to choose a container that's 4 inches deeper than your largest, than the deepest root on the plant. So to get the most out of your space, you want to use high-yielding or dwarf varieties with small to moderate-sized fruit. This includes beans, beets, carrots, lettuce, peppers, and radishes. These are small peppers here and small bean plants so that they can fit in the container and they don't outgrow their space. The best thing is to look for short or bushy plants. So for example, bush beans rather than pole beans, rather than tall or vining plants. If you are going to use tall or vining plants such as tomatoes or squash, it's a good idea to put a cage or a trellis nearby. And this will improve the yield if you have stakes in them. Another important question is seeds or transplants. The best thing to do is always to plant from seed, especially in a container, so that the plant can establish a much stronger root system. If you're going to get transplants, then the best thing to do is to get a small transplant. So again, smaller is better when it comes to buying plants from the store. The best things to plant from seed, for example, are beans, peas, beets, squash, carrots, radishes, lettuce, and corn. Some things that you might want to transplant are tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant, as they are harder to grow from seed. The fifth consideration is preparation of the soil. It's always good to use potting soil. Potting soil is very important, and not to use any other type of soil mix, so nothing that says planting mix or garden soil, etc. And most importantly, do not use garden soil in your containers. The garden soil could have some kind of disease or fungus. It's also very heavy and slow draining. The sixth most important consideration is fertilizing. Plants trapped in containers cannot search for nutrients or water. Confined root systems demand frequent but light fertilizing during their growing period. Nutrients are leached from the soil with every watering and need to be replenished regularly. 2 to 4 weeks after planting, begin applying a water-soluble fertilizer with each watering. Organic gardeners can use liquid fish emulsion, liquid kelp, or blood or bone meal. The numbers that are on the package indicate different things. The first number is nitrogen. Nitrogen encourages the growth of green leaves. The second is for phosphate, which encourages the growth of flowers and fruit. And the last is for potassium, which encourages root growth. You want to buy a fertilizer depending on the need of your plants. The fertilizer is formulated for one of these things. So, for example, this one is formulated to provide nitrogen for green leaves. And this one has more phosphorus than anything. So this would be good to feed for your tomatoes and other vegetables because it would produce fruit. The last consideration is watering requirements. when to water is always a big question that we have. It usually depends on the season, the container that you have, so the size or the material, the soil mix, and the sun exposure, so how much sun it gets. So it all interrelates to one another. You should check your containers daily. When you have things planted in containers, you can stick your finger into the container, and if it is wet, it doesn't need to be watered. If it's dry, then it should be watered. As I mentioned, in the summer, on the right here, you should provide a saucer. And in the winter, they don't need a saucer because then they'll be sitting in the water, which would be stagnant and possibly rot the plant. Another important note is to water early in the morning. You may have talked about this already, but we water early in the morning so that it doesn't get the leaves wet and encourage disease. As a reminder, also, white plastic reflects the sunlight. So in the summer, it's great to use white plastic. Black plastic absorbs the heat. There are different kinds of irrigation systems that you can get. This one here, they put a pipe into it where you water into that, and it gets deeper into these big buckets where they're growing some, looks like lettuce, and I think there's a tomato plant there. This is another different kind of irrigation system that you can buy and put inside of your pot. It's a self-watering system. It's a little hard to see here, but there's something called a soaker hose. I don't know if you've learned about that yet, but it's also very helpful. It allows the water to come out of the hose at a very slow pace and water throughout the day. And this is just another kind of irrigation system with the little tubes that goes right into it. But using a watering can, traditionally, that's what I do. That's perfectly fine as well. It just depends how much time you have, how many containers you have. So I just wanted to say that you can really garden in any type of container, and you can do it anywhere. Somebody here has used an old wagon, even an old boot, or a watering can that you're not using anymore, or somebody plant their flowers in a wood container that their fruit came in. So that's about it. But again, container gardening can be done just about anywhere. And no matter how small your garden is, with container gardening, you can grow as much as a farmer with much more land.
Wow. Any more questions for Alyssa on container gardening? Yes.
I have one question. Sí, bueno, más the repeated times that the meaning is different. I don't understand why. One is potassium and another is something different. But it has five, it has 2 5s, and it has 2 different things. Maybe chicken, and peaches, play.
Let's go back to that slide, and we'll try to explain that
Well,
for
it's
you.
interesting. I think each number was
Slide a
different.
little bit off.
Like
Was it
over
this
there, maybe yes, and maybe you. Yeah,
This
here. Yeah.
This one?
No, the back.
That one?
Yeah.
Okay.
One is this, and the another is the one that
Uh-huh.
that picture. They say potassium from.
Phosphate.
But they
Potassium. Nitrogen?
Why they don't use another number? Why they don't use 5, 6, or 5?
Okay. Do you want to tackle it? Go ahead.
I'm not sure if I understand.
You don't understand her question. Okay. On fertilizer packages, they always give you the big 3 of the macronutrients. The thing that plants need the most are nitrogen. They need that to grow healthy leaves and healthy roots and stems and things like that. They also need the middle number, which is phosphate, because without that they can't set flowers, they can't produce fruit. And they also need potassium, which is also called potash, And that has the nutrient that they need for healthy root systems. So whenever you see a fertilizer bag, you're always going to see, they're always consistent, those 3 numbers. Now it might have other things in it as well. It might have a little bit of boron or calcium or magnesium. It might have, but those are called micronutrients. The plant doesn't need very much of those. The plants need a lot of. So when you're buying fertilizer, you're mostly looking for those 3 numbers because that's mostly what you're buying is those 3 ingredients, okay? If you want to get, for example, just calcium for your plant, you will buy something like bone meal because that is going to be high in calcium, but it's not going to have any of these things in it. It's just going to mostly be calcium. I mean, it's going to have a little bit, but mostly it's just going to be calcium. So the point is, those are the macronutrients, the ones that the plant needs a lot of. And the other things, plants only need a little tiny bit, and those are actually just micronutrients because they're very small amounts needed. Does that answer your question?
No.
Oh, okay. What is your question then?
My question is, when they use number 5 for 2 different ingredients, but they don't use a different number?
Okay. Oh, okay. It could be 1061. It could be 932. It's not that they're the same. It's just that.
For example, the another is 511.
Right.
No, the other.
This one has, okay, this one has 5% nitrogen in it, 1% phosphorus, and 1% potassium.
It's like exactly like the same in the other. It has 5% the 2 things and I don't remember the number.
10 on the.
Yeah, that one has 10%. So this one has, for the 1 cup of it, you use 1 cup of this compared to 1 cup of the next slide. This one's got twice as much nitrogen in it, okay? You can also buy fertilizer that says 40, 40, 40. That's really concentrated. If you put that much on your plant, you'd probably burn it and it would die because it's too strong. We like you guys to use the low number stuff. The lower the number, the better. As a matter of fact, compost, when you make that, and that's the best fertilizer for your plants because you're feeding the soil and not the plant itself, that has a number like 0.5, 0.3, 0.1. It's really low. But it doesn't matter that it doesn't have a lot of this in here because it works in a different way in the soil. It actually feeds the micronutrients that feed the plants. So the lower, for our purposes, when we want to be organic gardeners, the lower the numbers, the better for our plants. The higher the numbers, the more chance you're going to burn your plants, but you're also going to kill all of the microorganisms in the soil. You're going to kill the earthworms. You're going to have dead, sterile soil. So the lower numbers are better. And we hope that if you're using compost on a regular basis, and we want you to have a compost pile, compost all your kitchen waste, compost all your yard waste, go borrow leaves from your neighbors, get whatever you can get, make compost, and put that in your garden, you won't need to buy fertilizer at all. Okay, does that make sense, I hope?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, good. Any other questions about the container gardening or about fertilizing or about any of that? Yeah, in general, you don't have to buy fertilizer if you have compost. Compost takes the place of all of that. It does all of that for you. It feeds your soil, and then your soil, in turn, feeds your plants. It's a whole different way of thinking of it. The commercial growers, they will put in a sterile potting soil with no life at all, tons and tons of high-potency fertilizer on it in the store. It gets the plant to grow big enough to put a flower on it so you guys buy it and take it home. But as soon as you get home, that plant, you put it in the ground, it's going to struggle because it's been used to a diet of high concentrated fertilizer, and all of a sudden now you're cutting off its supply. It's going to say, wait, I have nothing to grow on. I can't function. So those plants that you buy in the store are not, they're artificially fed, let's put it that way. When we want to grow it ourselves, we want to do it the natural way. We want the soil to feed the plants, the soil to encourage the life in the soil to take up the nutrients in the soil, eat it. Like the bacteria, for example, I explained this in week 1, but I'm just going to go through it really quickly again. The bacteria eat the soil, or they eat the stuff in the soil. They will poop it out as microbial manure. Then the plant can take it up. Without that bacteria, if it doesn't pass through the body of the bacteria, the plant can't use it. It's already there, though. Everything your plant needs is already in the soil. You just have to make it available to them by giving all that life in the soil a chance to live. Does that, I hope that helps.
Yes. we can make the compost like, for example, the trees, the pine trees, that has a lot of garbage, and we can put it together and mix it, and put it in our plants too. Like,
Okay, you're gonna wanna compost it first, like,
Yeah.
let's say you have, remember when Randy gave his talk and he talked about taking the kitchen waste,
yeah,
like on the outside of the avocado, or the orange peels, or the onion
Yeah,
skins, you put that in your compost pile, the bacteria break it down and they turn it virtually into dirt. And then you put that in your garden after it's already gone through the process.
yeah, doing that sometimes.
Okay, does that make sense, I hope?
Yes, thank you very much.
And when you have containers, you can fill them with compost.
You can do organic containers as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you add the compost? Do you put it on top, or do you put it like, do you need to mix it, or how do you put it?
Yeah, you want to put it right on top of the soil, and you want to let the earthworms and stuff come and get it and bring it down. They'll come and get it and they'll bring it down. They'll do that whole turning thing for you very gradually and naturally. But at the same time, if you try to turn it in, you're breaking all those little strands of things that you want to encourage in the soil. So you want to cultivate as little as possible. Matter of fact, I think on week 1, which probably went right over your heads because it was a lot of information, but if you have a plant you're removing from your garden, instead of yanking it up by the roots and shaking off the dirt, you've just disturbed all that soil, it's better to just cut it off, leave the roots on the soil, let it decay naturally. Take the top of it, put it in your compost pile, and leave the rest undisturbed as much as possible. Does that make sense? Yeah. The more you turn it over, the more you're damaging the life in the soil. So put your compost right on top and let the worms come and get it and do their thing with it.
And when you are like, when you haven't planted anything in that area, and you need like to break the ground and.
If you're planting for the first time, you have to get the plant in there. There's no, but you don't have to make a big hole to put a little plant in. Just make a hole as big enough as you need to get that plant in there, and then leave the rest of it as undisturbed as possible. Okay? So the general rule of thumb is don't dig it if you don't have to. Okay? So any more questions for Alyssa? Yes.
I'm not able to make my own compost in my garden.
Okay, yes. As a matter of fact, I have 5 compost bins. I still don't make enough compost for my gardens because I have 17 raised beds. I have a lot of it. So I use all that I can make, and then I go buy organic compost at the nursery. And I buy it, make sure it says organic compost. And you can buy it and you can use that just as if you would make your own at home. I hope that helps you. So if you don't have the room for compost, you don't want to do compost for some reason, you can just go buy your organic compost and that's just as good. Okay, yes.
Yo empecé a juntar como las cáscaras de limón y naranja, todo lo que pelo de las verduras y las eché en un bote de fierro. No sé si dejarlas ahí o qué tienen que hacer.
Okay, orange
Se
peels
haga
are
bono.
fine in the compost,
Para que se
just
haga.
not a lot of them all at once. In other words, if you just have a few oranges and you have the peels from just eating your lunch, those can get chopped up and put in the compost, that's no problem. But if you have 4 wheelbarrows full of orange peels, you don't want to put it all in at once, only because it's just too much acid at one time. Does that make sense? So if you're going to do that, just put some of them in the compost, leave some of them off to the side, and then add them slowly over time, so that it won't overwhelm the compost. Does that make sense, I hope?
Pero está bien que lo deje en el bote de fierro o tengo que ponerlo en otro
Is it
lugar.
okay if I leave it in the bin? Is what she asked?
Oh, if you have the compost actively working with worms and everything in there, don't add all the orange peels at once. Just put some of them in and leave the ones you're not going to put in there, just leave those off to the side in another container somewhere. So that you don't want to overwhelm. If you put too many orange peels or lemon peels, anything in at one time, you could get to a point where you have so much acid you would kill all your worms.
I think that she's asking like, she has a container,
Yeah.
like metal container.
Yes.
And she's asking like if she can leave the peels there, or she can put them in another thing. Because she's not sure if she can use a metal container.
Oh, does it have any drainage on the bottom or is it sealed on the bottom? Does it have any holes?
Dice que si tiene agujeros su bote.
No tiene agujero, está Casi es un bote
Okay,
de
if it
más.
doesn't have any holes in it, when those orange peels start to break down, and they will, they're gonna get really wet. And if you don't have a way for the water to get out of that container, it's gonna start to rot and smell. It wouldn't be a good plan. So I would put it in something that's open bottomed so it can drain the moisture away.
¿Sí estoy yendo, verdad? Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Gracias.
Alyssa, thank you so much. That was really informative. Okay. All right, our next speaker. Someone you all know and love, Randy Thompson from week 1 when he talked about composting. We had some technical issues with our computer that night. But tonight he's going to talk to you about tools, taking care of your tools, which tools you really need, which ones you can get do without. So take it away, Randy.
Okay, I have a few slides here that I want to show you for things that I did not want to bring. Okay? So this is real simple, and then I'll turn the lights back on so we can see each other. When you have tools, if you get the best tools that you can afford, and I know Luke is actually supplying tools, or MEND is supplying tools for your gardens, but you always want to get the best tools that you can afford. You want to clean them and store them carefully. And sometimes when you're having difficulty, there's no such thing as, there's nothing better, let me put it this way, than the right tool for the job. By the way, you can see how these tools are stored in this picture. This is a handicraft project here. This looks like a piece of press board with some little gussets on the studs inside of a garage. So you can be creative. But the goal is get your tools off the floor, get the edges and the points off the floor. That way they'll stay sharp. So I have some other examples here of that goal. You see on the far right, someone's used an old dirt rake head as a small hand tool storage. That's kind of a cute idea. There are many commercial solutions. If you want to buy those, you can. But the idea is to store your tools so they're not under your feet and they're not getting damaged. One way that's possible to do this is you can build a rack. This is a commercial solution here. But if you have some materials that you can take those tools and stand them so that they're tool-end up, and I just leave that to your imagination. Anybody recognize what that is?
Yeah.
Isn't that a cool idea?
Yeah.
So if you have an old pallet hanging around and you just kind of get it up next to one of your open walls, if you can attach it so it won't fall down, you can store long-handled tools right there. I just happened to pull some of these off the web. This is another idea. They used looks like a 50-gallon drum, either with a lid or they turned it over and put holes in it. You can see that in the middle image there. Nails work, spikes, hooks. One thing you can do is if you have studs that run vertically, go ahead and take a 2x4 and run it horizontally, and then put your attachments in that. That way it stays very neat. This was another idea that I saw. If you have 2-inch or 3-inch PVC or ABS, and stuff is pretty easy to cut either with a hacksaw or with a pipe cutter. And what they're doing is they're cutting them on an angle so they can screw them into the wood. And all those handles are resting on the floor. These are just to give you ideas. I'm sure you can be more creative than all this. I'm going to show you an example later, but I just want to say this right now. Never put a tool away that looks like that. You know, it's real easy to get some water and some kind of a brush, like a tire brush or any old brush, and scrub that dirt off of the shovels. I'm going to show you what that does to shovels in just a minute. But you want to clean the shovels and the picks and the hose and all those steel tools, because what they'll do is they'll turn back into earth. They will rust. I'm going to talk about how to care for those in just a minute, but don't leave your tools dirty. And also don't leave them out. You know, the handles also rot from all the sun and all the exposure, so it's good if you wipe those off and then put the tools inside. This is just the last thought, then I'm going to be done with slides. If you have a 5-gallon bucket that you can fill with sand and then add oil. You know, that I've heard different recipes, but the idea is if you add an oil that is going to, a food grade oil would be good, a food grade mineral oil, and I'll show you an example of one of those when the lights come back on. Or a light vegetable oil, that tends to go bad, so you might have to change it. But the concept is you can take your tool and you can plunge it into the sand, which will help clean the tool, and oil it, and then wipe it off and hang it up. So that's a possibility. I don't do this, but I'm showing you this picture. That's great, thank you. Just turn them on. Okay, so I'll go ahead and shut these off. I think that'll put that to sleep. I hope it does. Okay.
There you go.
Now, I'm not saying that either me or my wife did anything wrong, but here's two pretty identical shovels. And can you see the scarring that has occurred here? And you remember that dirty shovel that I showed you in the slides? These are actually only about a year old. I have much older tools, but I thought this was pretty interesting because these are identical in every way, except this one was left in the yard while we were working. I probably did it. And I left the clay soil on there, and it really sticks well. And it does what it wants to do. It does the thing that earth does. It started working on the steel and breaking it down and rusting it. So I thought, well, you know, I'm going to keep this shovel around for a few more years. I better clean it up. So whatever way you choose to make rust go away, I use steel wool, and I scrub on it with a little bit of oil, and I try to get it back to steel. And then what I do is I'm going to lay these down. This is a mineral grade food oil, a food grade mineral oil, excuse me. This is just one, but it gives you an idea. It's something you can buy at a grocery store, maybe at a home center. I happen to buy this at Bed Bath & Beyond. I use it on my wood cutting boards. But I take a little bit and I just put it on a rag and then wipe it all over the shovel. Okay, not motor oil. Unless you want to pour motor oil in your garden, not motor oil. Okay, that's the message there. I'm going to lay these down. I have a few hand tools I want to talk about. You may have seen, these are very old and I never really ever used these. There's a big flat side on the bottom here, and there's a cutting edge. This is an anvil cutter, okay? And this you use on dead growth. When you're cutting dead branches out of a tree or out of plants, this is not something you use when you're trimming vegetables. It crushes them, okay? Anvil cutters. And I can pass these around if you want to see them. This is what an anvil looks like. Okay, this is a different style. This is a bypass. It's like a pair of scissors. The blade passes the anvil. It doesn't stop. So this is very sharp. And this is the kind of tool you would use if you're pruning your fruit trees or your, I don't know, pruning certain vegetables that you want to take cuttings off of. Could be tomatoes. You might prune up high and take a bunch. Sometimes chard maybe, with the big fleshy plants. And this leaves a nice clean cut. It doesn't crush. And I'll pass this around. And notice that these are clean, and I've also wiped them down with mineral oil. And then here's one more trimmer. You've seen this before. Remember when I talked about compost? This is my grass clipper. And this I use at the end of this plant cycle for cutting up the plant. Because I can get a big mouthful in this plant, in this tool. It's hard to get with a little bypass trimmer. This is also a bypass trimmer. It's just got a long blade. So if you want to see that, I'll pass that around. Does anybody care to see that? Yeah. Okay. So I made my own shovel, or my own holster there. But it keeps it, I can keep it with me. I don't lose it. That's good. This is a tool that you're going to get. You can see this one's kind of filthy. I should have cleaned this one up. It's a cultivator. Okay, a cultivator you use when you're trying to loosen soil at the surface. And it's a very good tool sometimes for doing shallow weeding or for allowing fertilizer to get, or compost to get in around your plant. And it's a good soil loosening tool. All right? Here's another little tool that I think you're getting, not exactly this, but it's a little trowel. And the idea of a little hand trowel is that you can use it to open the ground up when you're doing new planting. I think that's actually when you're replanting, when you're filling pots, it's just a small shovel. So it's very useful for that. On big tools like the shovels, remember if I were to put those on the ground point down, they get blunt. And so it's good to keep them sharp because they'll dig well. So the way you keep them sharp is with a file. Makes sense. You just get a metal file and just round the steel and take the burrs off. And I didn't bring a file because I think everybody knows what a file looks like. But sometimes when you're doing finer work, say with like those little trimmers I passed around, you might have a stone, and that would be, you'd work the metal the same way on a stone. Just put a little oil on. I brought oil just to show that you do this. And what that does is it floats the particles above the stone so that the stone can stay clean. And you just gently work the tool and take the burrs off and put an edge back on it. So if somebody's out there with your tool cutting wire for a fence or something crazy and really messing the tool up, you might have to come back with a file and take off some coarse metal and then come back with a stone and clean it up again. I very rarely use the stone, but I might use it, say, on that grass clipper or on the little bypass clipper once a year, just to take off the worst burrs. So really, if you just follow that idea, when I'm using my tools, they can be dirty. As soon as I'm done, clean them up, put some oil on them so they don't rust, and put them away. They'll last a long time, and they'll serve you very well. Do you have any questions? Okay, go ahead.
Why, no, does the grass do bad to the ground or something, or?
Okay, so you're probably asking about the grass trimmers I have there. Okay, that original idea for that tool was so that I could edge around a grass. You know, if anyone hand edges.
I think you said rust, rust bad to the ground, is that what you said?
Yeah, rust.
Is rust bad?
Yeah, what does the rust do to the ground?
Rust is great. Rust is nothing but iron.
Okay,
And some
so we
plants,
don't need that on the ground, like we're growing.
now some plants love iron, and some plants will give iron to them. What doesn't like rust is the steel.
No, because like you're teaching us to keep the tools clean.
Right.
So why is that important?
Because, okay, well, you know what a rusty, dirty tool eventually loses its edge and then it won't work in the case of the mechanical tools. And in the case of these tools, like the shovel, take a look at this. This was just one bad episode. This wasn't years of abuse. Can you see what's going on there? How the rest is eating the tool. So this is a good clean shovel. This one is going to turn into a horrible mess. It's not going to be a useful tool. So what I'm saying is you want to keep the steel from turning back into iron and then into rust. That's all. Yeah. Okay, does anybody else have a question? Go ahead.
The tool you use for the stump, you use is also for give you like more. It's good for. It's more. I don't know the word.
Do you want to? You can say in Spanish and she'll translate.
Okay. Esto que tiene ahí es también para darle como filo a las cosas.
Is that to file the tools? The little stone
A
you
little
have?
stone. Okay, I would use a stone like this on tools like these.
Yeah.
Because it's a fine edge. I mean, I could almost shave with one of these if I wanted to.
Es como para darle filo.
Is it like to file them?
Yeah, it sharpens them. Do you ever sharpen a kitchen knife with a
Yeah,
stone?
I know.
Yeah, the same thing. Feel this. Just feel the edge. You see, it's like a knife.
Yeah. What place did you buy the stone and how much is it?
You can buy stones anywhere. I just happen to have this one around for years, so I brought it. But I was looking on the web tonight, and they have some really beautiful stones that are kind of in the shape of round tools. They're kind of like a fish. And those are so that you can use the stone without taking the tool apart. With this one, I actually have to take the tool apart, so I can work it like a knife. But there are many varieties of stones. And some are made by the companies like Corona or the Swedish company, our other, what's that? Felco. Felco, they make stones just for their tools. So you can buy, if you want to get really crazy about it, you can get very specific stones. Yeah. But I wouldn't worry about it right off the bat. Your tools are going to be sharp. Just make sure your kids don't get a hold of them and start, pounding rocks.
No, it has one in my tools in a special place.
Yeah. And so as they age, I mean,
I buy one 99-cent store and they was kind of wood, but.
yeah. But these are, you can see these have had moisture on them. They're starting to get surface patina. But they're also still pretty sharp because I try to keep them clean. So that's why the tools, instead of replacing them. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just want to add, if you've ever tried to, let's say you want to plant a tree, and you have a dull shovel. That is not a fun thing to do. You're going to be there all day long, you're going to be sore. You have a sharp shovel, it cuts right through like butter. It's easier, it's so worth it. It's like a kitchen knife. If you're trying to cut up your vegetables with a dull knife, you're more likely to cause injury to yourself. And it's going to take longer and it's not going to be fun. When you have a nice sharp knife, it goes through fast and it's easy. Same thing with the garden tools. Okay, the next one is going to be about edible landscaping. This is Paula Kleihauer, and she's taken a special course to learn how to do this, but basically she's going to show you how you can grow vegetables in the most unusual places. Paula, take it away.
Okay, it's somebody from back in history, like Johnny Appleseed, came back miraculously to our time and went around and looked in suburban areas at gardens. He'd probably sit down and weep. Don't throw my lunch.
Oh, you want one of them?
I have a seat.
How about that?
That's fine,
Okay.
okay? Why? Because in olden times, even say 100 years ago, people grew their food. Everybody grew their food. Okay? Even 50 years ago, our grandparents, they often had a fruity apple, a cherry, peach, a pear in their front yard, and if you went out their kitchen door, there was a vegetable garden, an herb garden, what we call a kitchen garden. We've gotten further and further and further away from that in the last 50 years particularly. Although now we have what I would call a renaissance of starting to get back to, some of us at least, growing some of our own food. And you're part of that renaissance. We still tend to think of gardening in two areas. We have our ornamentals, the pretty things, the beauty, the aesthetics, and we have our functional things, food. They don't have to be separate things. Now, I know you're going to have a raised bed and you're probably going to put your vegetables in there. But you might put a flower in too. You might put a marigold next to your tomato. Edible landscaping is an exciting way of looking at a garden or a yard as a place to combine beauty and function. The ornamental and the food production. It makes use of food plants as design features, not just as food to eat. Now, edible landscaping may seem like a new idea to us, but it's not a new idea. If you go back and look at drawings from the 18th century, 1700s, from France, from England, from Italy, you will see beautiful gardens that combine flowering plants and plants that they could eat. 70 to 100 years ago in this country, during the World Wars, we were encouraged, or the people who were here then were encouraged, to plant victory gardens right in the middle of their flowers because there was rationing and not everybody could get all the food they needed. So everyone was encouraged to plant their own gardens. Then, as I say, we moved away from that. In the 1970s, a lady by the name of Rosalind Creasy started to promote and write about the idea of edible gardening. She's written many, many books. She's one of the first people to start this again. Now, food plants contribute different things to the garden other than just the food. They may contribute a leaf shape. Think of a carrot. The food is down in the ground, but there's this lacy, leafy green that comes up. Makes a lovely border. Food plants can contribute color. There are Swiss chards that are in red, green, yellow, orange. It's called bright lights, one of the kinds. They're beautiful. There's a cauliflower that's called graffiti. It's a bright, bright purple. Stands out. It looks pretty. It eats well. Cabbages come in different colors. We know red and green, but there's different kinds of ornamental cabbages that are all different lacy configurations. Amaranth is a grain. It comes in a variety of green and red and yellow. One type of it is called Joseph Coat, after the biblical tale of many colors. Beets. There's a beet called Bloodspole, and it has crimson burgundy leaves that come up. Very, very colorful. There's a leek that's called Santa Claus. It has red stems instead of green. So you have a lot of variety in food plants. They also will contribute structure to your garden. You saw a picture earlier in the container presentation, I believe, of an artichoke. An artichoke is a really good example of a food plant that can be an anchor in your garden. It can get 3 feet, 4 feet by 3 feet, 4 feet. It has big leaves that come out. It's beautiful. Has the artichoke, it comes up. The artichoke is pretty. If you don't eat the artichoke and let it go, it turns into a beautiful dried purple flower. It's about that big. If you didn't know better and you saw one blooming, you wouldn't realize it was something you could eat, or could have eaten. Excuse me. Okay. Now, there are many different opportunities to incorporate food plants into your garden. One way is considered very intensive. You may have read about or heard about people who take out all of their front lawn, goodbye grass, and they plant edibles in it. That's kind of radical. Okay? Most of us, or any of us particularly who have young children, we need a little grass area for kids to play in. So we're not going to take the whole thing out. Instead, we can do plant by plant. One or two existing plants, take them out and put in an edible. Maybe you have a bush that's really dying, or you never liked it in the first place. You can pull it out and put your artichoke in. Okay? Maybe you have room to put a little border. You can put carrots with their frilly little leaves, and it's very attractive. Instead of planting a tree that's just shade, plant a fruit tree. Plant a nut tree. You get the shade, you get the nice big canopy, but you get food too. So two purposes. Ground cover even. You can take out ground cover, some grass, and plant strawberries. They are pretty and they certainly taste good. So you can start slowly, 1, 2 landscape plants being replaced with an edible. Another thing in edible landscaping, most of us don't think about the fact that there are a lot of flowers that are edible. Nasturtiums, pansies, violas. The flower from any plant that you eat, the flower is also edible. They're fun to sprinkle a little bit in your salad. They cook it up a little bit, both flavor and color. When you're creating an edible landscape, you have to take a couple of different things into account, actually more than a couple, but both the aesthetic and the productive potential of an area or a space. You need to create a balance. Okay. Also, you need to take into consideration the water requirements. A lot of vegetables, fruits, they need a lot of water. And some of our landscape plants, particularly natives, they don't like a lot of water. They grew in a Mediterranean climate, and they're not used to a lot of water. So you have to watch what you're mixing from that standpoint. One of the aspects of edible landscaping is what is called companion planting. Companion planting is based on the idea that certain plants can benefit from being grown close to, next to other plants. Legumes, for example, peas, beans, I know we talked about in another class, they have the ability to pull nitrogen out of the air into the soil for their own use and for the use of surrounding plants. So that's a companion. Pest suppression. Some plants have a tendency to ward off pests for other plants. Marigold comes to mind. French marigolds have a way of suppressing nematodes, which is something that attacks the roots on some plants. Tall growing plants that love the sun go up, and they may share space with something that covers on the ground that needs a little shade, or is at least shade tolerant. There's something called beneficial habitats. We talked, I'm sure, earlier about beneficial insects, like the lady beetles that eat the aphids. Certain plants that you can plant will attract those beneficial insects. They also attract the birds that then eat the bad guys. Now, a historical example of companion planting you may have heard of, it's called the Three Sisters. It's something that the Native Americans, particularly the Iroquois tribes, used. And they taught the first settlers that came to this country how to do this. And the Three Sisters are corn, beans, and squash. And if you think about it, The corn goes up. It's a tall, sun-loving plant. And it's sturdy. It's on a stalk. The bean comes and it twines up the corn. You don't need a trellis. The corn is there for it. Okay? The bean is a legume, and we said the legume puts the nitrogen back into the soil, so it helps with that. The squash has big leaves, it's on the ground, and it acts like a living mulch. It helps retain the water, and it helps suppress the weeds, keep the weeds down. That goes back hundreds of years. People are still doing it. If you go into certain areas in New Mexico, Arizona, that have large Native American populations, you'll hear about and see the Three Sisters. Now, just as there are some plants that go well together, there are some plants that are not overly compatible. And if you got a chance to look at the handout that I gave you, you'll see there's two columns, or well, there's three. But one is good companions, and the other is not so good companions. Okay? So you want to kind of pay attention to this kind of thing. An example would be beans and plants from the onion family. They just don't seem to do real well together. They won't necessarily all die, but they don't come to their strength. So, what you want to do, or what I would hope you will do, is when you go home, think about the kinds of things you like to eat. And then think about what those plants look like. And then when you have a chance, and it's daylight, go outside and look around whatever your yard or whatever area is, when it's light, and think about where you could sneak in an edible plant. Either in a little empty space, or as I said, maybe there's something that has never done very well, and you pull it out and put something new in that will do well. There's lots of opportunities and possibilities for edible landscaping. So I hope I've given you some ideas of different ways to look at your yard. And I have, thanks to Bettina Gahi, a couple of pictures of edible landscapes, also of vertical gardening. Vertical gardening means you're growing something up, like a trellis, like a tomato plant in a tomato cage. You can, just some of it, yeah. You can espalier. If you think about espalier, it's taking something like a fruit tree and growing it and training it out on wires sometimes, or against a wall. It's a lovely way to cover up an ugly wall, and you get fruit. Apples do this very well. Where's my pointer here? Okay. So here's an example. You can see back here what looks like an artichoke plant. Here's squash probably. There's flowers also, so it's a combination. My favorite, you know I like artichokes, right? Here we have the artichokes mixed in with flowers. The flowers are lower, the artichoke plant comes up. And over here, some flowers and some herbs. This is a beautiful front yard landscape that has herbs mixed in with the flowers, and also squash. Oops, wrong button here. Sorry. And you see again, there's squash tucked in here with the big, beautiful yellow flowers. Grapes on an arbor. Now that's another way of doing your vertical landscaping. It's going up and across. It's not taking up a lot of room on the ground. And you can grow other things that are maybe a little bit shade tolerant or shade loving under it. We have a trellis, not a teepee here, and another one over here, trellis to let things grow up. Over here, the same thing, even in a raised bed, you can put something that'll make it grow vertically. And these are just some examples of other kinds of ways to make things vertical gardening. These are using either PVC pipes or regular pipes. This is like using old bamboo pieces that you can tie together with garden twine. It doesn't take a whole lot of mechanical ability to do this. Again, your tomatoes with your little teepees. Even in a container, it goes up, it doesn't sprawl out. So they don't need to be fancy or expensive to work well. You can use most anything. Okay, this is an example of an attempt at some vertical gardening. It's just flowers right now, but it's getting bigger. This is at a school, Jack London Community Day School. This is the cage with a Coke machine in it. Hasn't had Cokes in it in years. They're hanging, cut off, empty plastic bottles, and they're putting soil in it, and they're planting. It's vertical, it's up, it's not taking space on the ground. This is the example of both of these of the espalier I was mentioning, where you're training a fruit tree.
Oh.
That's okay, I'm good with that. So, many, many ways you can have beauty and function. Thank you.
Do you have any questions for Paula? Ways to incorporate? Yes.
I have like a spot in the garden that there's not a lot of sun there, and it is near a fence. And I planted some aloe vera there, but it's drying up. So I'm trying to maybe take it out of there and put something else. But I don't know what can I put like that because I think that it's not gonna be enough sun there. So I don't know what to grow there.
It's on a wall.
It's like an fence. It's a wired.
Okay. What direction is it? Does it face?
I don't know.
Okay. If it's a south wall, for example, or a west wall, you know, we talked about the fact you get more light there, more sun. You might be able to grow something up and have it get enough sunlight. If it's not getting much sun, you probably aren't going to be able to grow something down on the ground itself. But it would be a good attempt at some vertical growing to get it up into the sunlight.
Pero eso alcanzó porque es Chinese.
No, but it does have sun. Like it is not a fence, like concrete wall or something. It is a chain link.
Chain link fence.
Yeah, and then it has like a green thing. Like I don't know how do you call that?
50% or 25%.
It is just like a shade. It is a little bit of shade. I don't know, how do you call that?
Do you get full sun for part of the day?
Yeah, like in the middle of the day, I have a lot of sun there.
You have it. Do you know how many hours approximately you get?
Maybe like maybe like 6, maybe.
Okay.
Now in this season.
Okay, well, right, summer. Okay. If you get 6 hours, you can
That's-
grow most anything.
That's full sun.
That's
Anything
called
over
full
5
sun.
is considered full sun.
Okay.
You know, if you're only getting 3 to 4 hours, then you need to reach for the sun.
Okay. No, I think that maybe 5, 6. I'm not quite sure. But I think, okay, thank you.
I don't think I'd put my tomato or my pepper or my eggplant there because they really need heat. But something else, sure.
Matter of fact, each of those things can become a little microclimate. For example, on the back of your garage, let's say you have a stucco garage, right? If the sun is beating down on that, that stucco is going to heat up. So that little area right in front of the garage is going to be warmer than the rest of your yard. So if you're looking for a place to grow peppers or tomatoes or something, that might be a perfect climate for those tomatoes and peppers because it's going to get the heat up just a few degrees more than the rest of the yard, and that's going to make all the difference. So start thinking about it when you look at your yard of little microclimates. Oh, there's one sun that gets a little morning sun, but it's in the shade in the afternoon. That's perfect for plant A. And in the afternoon, this one it has no morning sun at all, but it gets a couple of hours of afternoon sun. That's perfect for plant B. So, but these are going to be trial and error. You're going to try it, you're going to see what works. But your book actually has a good guide for you as far as cool season, warm season, you know, whether to grow it in spring or whether to grow it in fall, whether to grow it in the hot part of the summer, if it needs full sun, if it needs shade. So there's a lot of resources for you. You don't have to start from square one. You can, you know, if you're just reading this book, actually, it's going to give you a huge head start because it's going to give you the knowledge that you need to get going. But then your own experience year after year is going to build on that knowledge, and then you're going to be an expert. You're going to know what works in your yard, because that's the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter if it grows in my yard perfectly. It has to grow in your yard.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, thank you. So we have now completed our last formal presentation. What I'm going to do now is just take you through a really quick overview of everything we've learned in the last 4 weeks. After that, I'd like you to pass up your, or we'll collect your post-class surveys, and then we will give our graduation certificates out to those who have come to all 4 classes. Now, if you had to miss a class for family obligation or work or whatever, and you came to 3 out of the 4, we're going to be doing these classes again in September right here. You can have the opportunity to come back and make up a class, and you can get your certificate at a later time if you are so inclined to do that. So if any of you want to do that, we'll make that available to you. Is that okay with you, Luke? Okay, cool. Okay, so, take a seat. We're going to just go through really quickly. Okay, the first thing, you guys have your garden beds either installed now or it's going to be installed by June 1st. The first thing you want to do is make a plan, okay? You want to figure out, what am I going to grow? Now, you want to grow, you have a limited amount of space, right? You cannot grow everything. You have to decide, what is it I'm going to grow, okay? If you only have enough space to grow maybe 6 things right now, later on you're hoping to advance that with containers and with other things and finding spaces in your yard that you can tuck things into. But if you only have limited space, you want to grow the things that you like to eat that you can grow better than the grocery store can give you, okay? For example, tomatoes. You tasted a tomato at the grocery store, what does it taste like? It's watery, it's tasteless, it's horrible. When you grow tomatoes in your own yard, they're beautiful, they're tart, delicious, sweet, they're wonderful. So if you like tomatoes, grow tomatoes because you can do better than the grocery store. Same thing with peppers. You might want to grow a special pepper that's been handed down in your family for generations. You can't get that at the grocery store. Grow that. So for each of you, it's going to be an individual decision. What do I want to grow? I want to grow things in my yard that I like to eat. So I grow the things that I like. You may have a completely different palette of things that you want to grow, things that for the recipes that you make and for your family. So all of you sit down and decide. Now, you have to make decisions. For example, if I only have a certain amount of space, and this is showing 3 raised beds with some side space here. If you only have one of those, let's say you only have this, you can't grow, you can't grow all of it. You can only grow some of it. So make your decision. What am I going to grow, okay? Then make your plan, write it out on a piece of paper, and figure out what time of the year. Go to your chart. As a matter of fact, if you look in your book on page, here it is, this is page 14. There is a chart here, and it tells you, and of course I don't have my glasses on, but the recommended planting dates for each of those vegetables, okay? So you're going to have a fall plan, a winter plan, a spring plan, and a summer plan of what you can grow, okay? So you're going to want to talk about this with your husband or your wife or whoever else is in your family that's going to be involved in it and figure out, what is it I'm going to grow. Also, if you get a packet of seeds, there may be 200 seeds in that packet. You don't have to grow all 200 of them. Just grow a small amount. As a matter of fact, if you want to put 1 row of something in, let's say, for example, we're talking about this row right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You only need 8 plants. So I would say at the most only plant 16 seeds. Then you have something can happen to 8 of them. They don't come up, they get eaten by an insect, a bird picks off the top, something happens. But the point is you'll end up with 8 healthy plants if you plant 16. Take the rest of your seeds, fold them up tightly, put them in a sealed, like a Ziploc baggie in your refrigerator. You want to keep the seeds cold and dry. It's exactly the opposite of what it takes to germinate them. When you want them to grow, you make them warm and wet. So when you want them not to grow, you make them cold and dry. okay? They will keep in your refrigerator for several years, depending on the type of seed. So you can bring them out again next season and you can grow the rest. Take 16 more out and grow those 16. Many beginner gardeners make the mistake of planting too many plants to start with. So just grow only what you need. Okay. Next, there's planting calendars that are available online for you. These are free of charge. One of the ones you can go to is the Farmer's Almanac. Just type in the search for the Farmer's Almanac, and you can come up with a planting calendar like this for your area. So you might want to type it in. It'll tell you when to start plants. So for example, if we look here, and this is in Spanish, so if we look here for tomatoes, for example, it tells you that you can grow tomatoes starting from March all the way through to November. Okay? So take a picture. So with that knowledge, then you know that what you're going to want to do, and there's also something called succession planting, which means if you're going to plant lettuce, for example, don't plant them all at once. Plant some of your lettuces and then wait 2 to 3 weeks and plant a few more. And then wait 2 to 3 weeks and plant a few more. And that way you have big lettuce, medium-sized lettuce, and small lettuce all the time. And you can constantly be eating out of that same space. So where you had that little bed with the vegetables, you might have tiny plants, middle-sized plants, and big plants all in the same space. Okay? And you can eat all the time. Keep going. Okay, so get one of these planting calendars. Okay. This one is www.farmersalmanac.com. That's a really good source. It's free. You can go in and put your zip code in. It'll tell you exactly what time of year you need to plant. But this one in your book is also a good thing for California. Okay? It will also give you a tool that you can plan your garden out like this. You can actually go and pick and choose, like it's like drag and drop tomatoes, and drag and drop cabbage, and drag and drop lettuce. It'll actually help you plan your thing out, and then you can print out your plan, and you have your plan ready to go. Okay. I think I've tried to make it important to you that the soil is everything. Now, if I get that one point across to you, then I've done my job. Because so many people don't realize that there's so much life in the soil. If you kill off that life, you're basically killing off the plant's future. So you want to be able to encourage that life, feed the life. If you feed the soil will feed your plant. So kind of get out of the mindset we used to have many years ago that you had to put fertilizer on to feed the plant. It doesn't work that way. Feed the soil. You want to build your soil, constantly add compost to it. Every time you take something out of it, if you're growing, you're taking nutrients out of the soil, you want to put compost back. So grow something, put more compost back. Grow something, put more compost back. Keep the cycle going. You want to know your soil. In other words, we talked about the testing of the soil. Do you have sandy soil? Do you have a clay soil? Do you have something in between? If you know you have sandy soil, you're going to have to water more often, less amounts, because it's going to go right through the soil and just go away. Sandy soil just drains fast. But clay soil, you have to water slowly over a long period of time for it to even get in there at all. But once it gets in there, it'll stay forever. So know your soil. Do that soil test that I was telling you about in the jar, where you put it in with water, you take some samples, put it in a jar, add water, a little bit of dishwashing soap or detergent, shake it up, let it sit for a few days, and when you see the sand, the silt, and the clay separate out, you'll know what kind of soil you'll have. That is going to be a huge clue to you to how much water you're going to need to give your garden. Okay?
Excuse me, can you put
Yes.
the other page back, please? I want to write down the address.
Oh, sure. This one?
That one, yeah.
Yeah, www.farmersalmanac.com.
Okay, thank you.
This is a really good website because for every single plant, like you can see there at the very bottom, tomatoes, it's got what kind of soil you need, what position it needs to be in the sun, if it's frost tolerant or not, what you need to do to feed it. It's got all that information for every plant. And then you can just pick and choose which ones you want to grow. Isn't that cool? Really cool. And also with your raised bed, you may want to put at this side of your bed all the stuff that needs a lot of water, and put at this side of your bed all the stuff that likes to be a little bit on the dry side. Okay? Also, depending on when your raised bed is, if for example, if this is the south, don't plant your really tall vegetables here because you'll be shading the sun from this side. So if this is north and this is south, you'll want to have the sun coming in from this angle. So you're going to want to plant your tall things on that side and leave the shorter stuff over here so that you get the full sun coming in to take care of your garden. So, I mean, just want to think about it. Be smart about it. Okay, can I go to the next slide now?
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we're building our soil. Now, never walk in your garden beds. Remember we talked about soil compaction. You squish the soil, you squish all the life out of it, the air out of it. There's no water can get in, no air can get in, you're gonna kill it. So if you have to walk in your bed, see how this man here is using a board? He's distributing his weight on the board so that he's not pushing soil down. Better to have pathways between your garden and walk only on the paths, never step in the beds. Okay? Keep your kids out and the dogs out too. Okay. Don't overcrowd. These plants look lovely when they're teeny tiny, but when they get big, that's going to be way too many for this space. Okay? So you're going to want to avoid temptation to put in too many plants. You want to sow the seeds in small batches every 2 to 3 weeks. Keep it going. Keep the cycle going. As you're taking out the last ones that are harvested, the new ones are growing up. You can always keep harvesting out of your bed. Okay? And also, don't plant all the same varieties. Plant 3 or 4 different kinds of lettuces, for example, because that way we won't encourage bugs to come in. If there's one plant sitting there by itself, for example, or 2 or 3, you're not going to get those bugs coming in and zooming in on it going, ooh, food, because it's going to be mixed in with so many other things. But like in a farm, you have 2 acres of broccoli. All the bugs that like broccoli are going to find that field. So you want to mix it up at home. We can do that. Commercial farmers can't do that. We can mix it up. Okay, next. Start your seeds. We talked about this the very first day. You can start your seeds in something as simple as an egg carton. However, remember, if you put it in this, it's going to dry out really fast. So in this case, you can use a half of an eggshell. Poke a little hole in the bottom of it so that there's some drainage, but it'll keep the moisture in. When you're ready to plant it out in the garden, that's actually going to even give you nutrients into the soil. So it's actually not a bad way to do it. I would personally take it out of the shell when we plant it, but then crumble up the shell and put it all around in the soil. It's going to be good for the soil. Okay? You can also buy seedlings. And if you don't want to start them yourself, you can buy seedlings and transplant them when the soil is warm. Be careful though. If you go to Home Depot, they're going to have stuff there that's the wrong time of year. Just because they're selling it doesn't mean you're smarter than that. You know it's the wrong time of year. You don't be putting tomato plants in July. That's not the right time of year, but they'll sell them at Home Depot in July. They're trying to get rid of them. They're hoping some stupid gardener is going to come and buy them because they don't know any better. You guys know better, okay? So don't assume that the stores that are selling the plants know what is best for you. Now, if you go to a smaller nursery, like a Green Thumb or whatever, and they have experts there, that's a better place to get advice from. The people at Home Depot, they don't know. Okay. Square foot gardening. This is a method we haven't talked about. There's a couple of pros to this. First of all, if you have a small amount of space, this is a good way to cram a lot of plants into a small space. You get high yields, it takes less water, and there's less weeds. What you basically do is you divide your garden into square feet, literally 1 foot square. And you plant something in every single square. Now, in the case of smaller crops, you might plant 12 plants in that square. There might be 6 plants in this one. There might be 12 plants in this one. Again, you're putting your taller ones towards the back because your sun is coming in from this angle. But you can actually cram a lot of plants in there. And as one becomes empty, you fill it up with something else. Just keep it going. Okay, so that's one method. It does require a very rich soil and lots of compost. So every time you take something, you harvest something out of there, you're going to want to put a few more cups of compost back in that space before you plant it again. Okay, avoiding pests and disease. This is very important. You're going to want to do basically these things. You're going to check your garden every day. It's fun for me. I walk out there with a cup of water or something, or tea or coffee. Look at your garden. Spend time in your garden. Get to know your garden. Your garden is a fun place to be. But as you're out there, you're going to want to look at it very carefully. So you want to inspect it. Now you can just take a little hand lens, like a little microscope thing, put it in your pocket. You see something interesting on that leaf, you want to get up close and say, what the heck is that? Okay. Catch it early before it goes too far, and you can avoid a lot of problems. Okay? So daily inspections are very important. You want to encourage the beneficial insects. Remember we talked about ladybugs? A ladybug larva, which I'm going to show you in a minute, can eat like 200 aphids a day. So you want to have lots of ladybugs in your garden, but you also want to have praying mantises. You want to have earthworms in the soil. You want to have green lacewings. These are good. The brackenid wasps, the brown beetles, those are good. Spiders. Spiders are excellent. Spider flies, nematodes, and of course honeybees. Honeybees are wonderful. We want to protect the honeybees. And you guys all know about colony collapse disease, right? You heard about that? Okay. There is a disease going around honeybees. Our honeybees are not originally from our area. They came over from Europe. They were brought over from the early settlers that came to the United States. But those honeybees adapted into our climate, and they've been going fine for years. But the way the commercial farmers and everything have done it is they take their hives and they move them from field to field to field, and they work them really, really hard. Well, a disease has hit these honeybees, and it's basically once the disease gets in the hive, it kills all the bees. And we have lost something like 63% of our bees in the United States. We have to really protect all the ones that are left, because if we lose all of our honeybees, we could all literally starve to death. The honeybees are one of our main pollinators for all of our crops that we eat. So honeybees are to be protected at all costs. So if you do see honeybees, you want to leave them alone. Basically, if you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. They will not bother you. When they're out foraging, they're not interested in you at all. Teach your children also to not, get all crazy like this when they see a bee, to just slowly back away, leave it be, it'll leave them be. Okay, so the honeybees are our friend. Okay, you're going to want to tolerate some minor damage. It's not a big deal. We're an organic gardener. Organic gardeners have a little bit of damage, and that's perfectly normal. It's to be expected. This is a leaf miner. This little caterpillar goes under the leaf inside there, and he just winds his way through. And when he gets to the end, he comes out and he flies away. Doesn't do any harm to the plant. It doesn't look very attractive, but it really doesn't do any harm to the plant. They're no concern. Don't worry about it. This is also some insect here has had, it's kind of blurry, but these are some little caterpillars that have eaten a couple of holes. No major damage. We don't care. No big deal. You just don't want to have them eating your entire plant. Now this is aphids. You guys recognize that, right? These aphids, okay? This is a lady beetle larva. That's what they look like. Ladybugs look like before they hatch into an adult. If you ever see these little things here, they look like little, little dragons in a way. They're really interesting. They're orange and black, and they're about twice as long as a normal lady. Well, depending on what stage they're like, but they can be twice as long as a ladybug. But at this stage, they can eat 200 of these aphids a day, every single one of them. So these are definitely to be encouraged. If you ever see these gardens, they're good bugs to like them. Okay. Now, physical barriers. This is something you can think about too. This is an enemy. This is actually a pretty little butterfly, but it's called the cabbage moth. You see those two black dots there? That's key. What they do is when they land on a plant, they'll lay eggs, and then you get these caterpillars. And the caterpillars will start eating your leaves. Now, if the plant is this big, a few holes, no big deal. If the plant is this big, you could have the entire plant gone in one night. So what a lot of gardeners do is they will put up a physical barrier, literally like that, or like this, to keep the butterflies from landing on their crop. Once the plant gets big enough, again, it's not a big deal. You can take it off. If a few caterpillars are on there, no big deal. The plant's already past the point of damage. It's not going to worry about it. Your crop will still be fine. Okay? Next, watering. Always avoid overhead watering. This is a sprinkler. If this is a hot day and you're watering in the heat of the day, in a sprinkler, you're going to lose 70% or more of your water to evaporation. That means if you put out 10 gallons of water, you're only going to get 3 on the plant. The rest 7 is going to blow away in the wind. You don't want that. So don't use overhead watering. It's also bad for the leaves too, and especially if you do it at the end of the night. If you have a damp night and you have your leaves wet, you can then, when it comes into the night when it's cold, you can get fungal diseases on your leaves. So you don't want that, like powdery mildew and stuff like that. You want to keep the leaves dry, so you want to water at the base of the soil. Now this is a cute trick. You can take 1 gallon pots, you can bury them in the soil. You then put your hose right in there. You can actually add a couple of handfuls of compost too. So when you're watering, you're also feeding your plants. It'll dissolve the compost, it'll go into the water. But all of that water is going to get into the root zone. None of it is going to evaporate. It's a very efficient way to water. So, and also you can plant all the way around this bucket. If you had, for example, peas or beans, you could put this in the middle of your teepee. And you could plant 5 plants around that and have your teepee go right over the top of the pot. And every time you water, you're watering the root zone of all 5 of those plants at the same time. So just something to think about, okay? You notice this structure here. Where's this? These right here, this is where you put your row covers over if you're trying to keep your butterflies off. So that's just PVC pipe, you bend it down. You can put some inexpensive fabric over the top, just seal the edges, no butterflies get in, no caterpillars, you're good to go. Okay, now, pile on the mulch. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Trying to find my thing. These are strawberries. This is straw. Strawberries got their name because they have to put straw around the berries to keep them up off the ground so they don't rot. So if you're growing strawberries, you want to put a thick layer of straw around all the plants so that when the berries come out, the berries lay on the straw. Keeps them clean, keeps them off the ground, the bugs don't get to them, they won't eat them. It's a really good way. But this is also really good for every single other plant you have. Go ahead and put a thick layer of mulch around all your plants in your raised beds. It'll keep the moisture in, you won't use as much water, it'll keep the weeds down. The plants love it, and you're encouraging that life. The earthworms will thrive, all the beneficial organisms will thrive. It's a really good way to do it. Also, put mulch in your pathways. Keeps the weeds down again, it'll keep the moisture in the area. It's a good way to go. It looks pretty too. I think having mulch in the beds is very pretty. Okay, next. Feeding your plants. Now again, compost is best. Oh, sorry, hold on. Compost is best. You want to have a compost pile, and it can be made out of anything. You want to dump your kitchen scraps in there. You want to add leaves, shredded leaves. You want to add your yard trimmings. When you go around and you cut everything, you cut it up and throw it in there. So you're going to add a little bit of dry stuff and a little bit of wet stuff. Okay. So what we're talking about here. So you can get a cheap compost bin like this if you want to at Home Depot, or you can make your own like the previous slide. This is just made out, you can make it out of pallets. It doesn't have to be expensive. But when you make this thing, basically, you're going to put in a mixture of green stuff, which is wet. That's your kitchen stuff. That's also grass clippings that are freshly mowed. However, if you let the grass clippings sit for 2 months and it's all brown and it's dry, now it's brown stuff. So it doesn't matter that it's not the particular stuff that's green or brown, is how wet is it, how fresh is it. A leaf falling off the tree green is wet stuff. But if it sat there for 2 months and it's brown now it's brown stuff, it's dry. Okay? So mix the two up. You want about a 50-50 mixture by weight. And by the way, a pile of leaves for weight doesn't weigh very much. So one little bucket of kitchen trash would weigh almost as much as a huge trash can full of leaves. So just keep that in mind, about by weight. You want about even amount. Okay, now there's two kinds of composting. We talked about this really briefly. There is hot composting. For that, you need a minimum size of 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet high. You need the pile big enough so that you get some heat generated. When you do that one, you keep all of your wet and dry ingredients separate until you make the pile. You decide, Saturday's my day. I'm going to make my pile on Saturday. You come out there, you put a layer of green. You put a layer of brown, you water it in. You put a layer of green, you put a layer of brown, you water it in. You keep going, you make this whole thing. You put the lid on it. That thing is going to heat up within 24 to 48 hours to about 140 to 160 degrees. You're going to want to turn it periodically to get the heat down because you don't want it to get too high. That thing will cook down really, really fast. That's hot composting. Most of us don't do that. Most of us have something called a cold compost bin. This is great for cold composting. See, it's not 3 by 3 by 3. It's smaller than that. But basically, you just start adding stuff to this. Add some leaves when you have them. Add some kitchen scraps when you have them. What happens is the worms come in from under here and they just kind of populate it. It never gets hot. It always stays cold. If you had hot composting with worms in it, it would cook the worms. You don't want that. So cold composting is the way. It's easier. You just add stuff as you go. You can, then it has usually a little trap door at the bottom here where you can harvest it. Now, a good way to turn this, by the way, is pick up the entire container, move it over here, and then get a pitchfork or something and dump it all back into there. Then about 2 weeks later, move it back over here. Pick up the entire pile and move it back into here. So you're basically just turning it over. The more you turn it, the faster it's going to cook, the faster you're going to have compost. But it doesn't hurt the worms, and it'll just give you compost faster. Okay? Worm composting. We haven't really talked about that. If you're interested in that, it's a separate little square bin that you buy. You have a special kind of worm called a red wiggler. It's not your garden worm. It's a special worm. If you're interested in that, I just suggest that you educate yourself before you do that. It's not the same as this at all. You need to know a lot of things before you do that. So we have not taught that in this class. So all I'm trying to tell you is don't attempt this until you educate yourself. Okay? Next. Use only organic products in your garden. We talked about this before. The lower number is better. Okay? If it says 1-2-1, is that organic or synthetic? Organic. If it says 30-30-30, synthetic. So which one do we want? Organic. Correct. So remember that first number is nitrogen, the second number is phosphate, and the third number is potash or potassium. This one is for the leaves. This one is for the flowers and the fruit. This one is for the roots. Okay? So if you want tomatoes, you want a high middle number there. You won't get very much fruit if you just have beautiful green leaves. Lots of leaves, no fruit. Okay? One thing also about tomatoes. Tomatoes can get something called blossom end rot. That means that the water basically is not available to the plant. It can't take it up. So basically that happens when you don't have consistent watering. In other words, you water your plant and then you let it dry out, and then you water it again and you let it dry out. What that causes is the soil gets afraid of, basically it's called hydrophobic. It means the soil's afraid of the water. It can't take up the water. So don't ever let it dry out. The whole thing is to keep it evenly moist. Drip irrigation is good for that because it'll go on slowly over time. It'll get down in there. It'll penetrate. You want to make sure that the entire root ball is wet, not just the outside edge. Because you can water it, pour a lot of water on, it'll run right off the top and down the sides and out, but the middle is still dry. So be aware of that. Okay?
How often do you water tomatoes?
When the plant is young, you're going to water more often. When the plant is more mature, you're going to water less often. Generally, by the time the plant is and pull off all the flowers off the baby plant, the tomato plant. Don't let it set fruit right away. You want it to develop and get to a nice healthy size before you start letting it set fruit. Once it gets to the point where it's a healthy size, it looks good, then you're going to want to water about once a week. But again, stick your finger in there, test it. If it's wet, don't water it. If it's not wet, water it. But keep it, you'll kind of get to know your soil, your area. Is it in full sun? It should be in full sun. But basically, water it when it needs it. Okay, now here's a couple of examples if you want to supplement your fertilizer when you're first starting out. Remember, you don't have that healthy bacteria yet in your soil. When you first put your beds in at home, it's naked, it has nothing. That will come over time. But for right now, you can add some stuff to it to get it off. You can start, of course, you can buy compost. We talked about buying that in bags. You can buy chicken manure, cow manure, is that copper de vaca? Fish emulsion, alfalfa meal, cottonseed meal. All of these are good choices for fertilizers that you can use to add to your bed to start, just to start off when you're first starting. Now by next year, you'll have all that good life. You won't need to use these again. Okay, companion planting. This is the three sisters that Paula was talking about. Here you have your corn. Here the beans are going up the corn. And here you have your squash on the ground. When you do this, you are actually helping lots of ways. Not only because you're confusing the heck out of the pests. The pests don't know what to do. There's so many different things in here, they can't find what they're looking for. So you're going to have less bugs, basically. But actually, it's a really good use of space because you're growing 3 crops in the place where most people would have just grown the corn, and this would have been bare ground, and you get this way you get 3 times as much food out of that same space. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, ideal crop rotation. This is a 4-year cycle, but basically remember that everything in the cabbage family, and cabbage is broccoli, cauliflower, kale, actual cabbage. All of those things are in the cabbage family. You don't want to grow those in the same part of the garden every year because in the soil they'll build up a bunch of like special things that attack cabbage plants. So the next year, put your cabbage over here. And the next year, put your cabbage over here. And the final year, put your cabbage over here. By the time you get back to year 4, there's nothing bad in the soil anymore. Now you're ready to go again. So again, you want to rotate around. Your bean family, you rotate it around. Your potato family, and what does that one say? Carrots and all, and the other vegetable crops. So basically, just keep it, even though you'll have one raised bed, make it into zones so that you know, okay, that's part A, B, C, and D, and keep track on a piece of paper what you plant each year so that you don't put the same crop in the same space, okay? And last thing is happy gardening, and I hope you get lots and lots of delicious, wonderful vegetables out of your garden, and I hope you have a lot of fun doing it, too. Thank you. is my name. If any of you have gardening questions and you want to ask them in Spanish, you can send me an email to that address and we will translate it into English. We'll answer the question, we'll translate it back to Spanish, and we'll send it to you. Okay. We are now time, by the way, is there any final questions about anything we've just talked about in any of the 4 classes? Yes?
You didn't talk about it, but one garden you put in this week, they have red ants. Do you have anything?
We actually did get a question about that. You know what? Red ants are actually particularly nauseous, but you can use white vinegar to kill red ants. You can actually just pour it right down if you have the anthill right there, you can pour the white vinegar. And the white vinegar will dissipate, it will cause no long-term harm for your plants at all. It's very acidic, it'll kill them. Yes?
También yo puedo las hormigas también puede, cuando uno tiene muchas hormigas,
When you
puede,
have little ants,
si corta las naranjas
if I cut
y
the
se las
oranges
pone ahí, nomás
and put
comen ellas y
on
se,
top of them,
y se van.
they eat them,
Si
they
no
eat
las
oranges
quieren
and then
matar.
they leave. If you don't want to kill them.
Si no las quiere
Okay,
matar.
say that one more time.
If you don't want to kill the ants,
Yeah.
you can just cut oranges and put them on top where they're at,
Uh-huh.
they eat and then leave.
Really?
Y
That is
así
very
se comen
interesting.
y se van. Y
Yeah,
así.
just
Well, that's worth trying. I didn't know that. You see, you learn something new every single day.
Porque ahorita no las quieren
Thank you, but why
matar.
wouldn't you want to kill your ants? I don't understand that. Ants are bad. Ants
¿Por qué
have,
no quiere matar por qué no quiere matar sus
here's the thing,
hormigas?
ants
Porque las
are
hormigas
farmers.
hacen daño.
Let me explain this really quickly. Ants are farmers. If you have a perfectly healthy plant, ants will go and get aphids from another plant. They will bring them over to this plant and they will leave them there. And they will grow them like a herd of cows. And they will milk those aphids for their honeydew. And then they'll take the honeydew back to their nest. They'll bring more aphids. They'll keep it going. Ants will spread mealybugs. Ants will spread all kinds of insects all around your garden to all of your plants. I don't think ants belong in the vegetable garden. Okay? I would discourage them. I would kill the ants if they come into my garden. Okay. Yes. More questions? No? Okay. I hope you guys like this series of classes. I hope you enjoyed it. Okay. So again, those of you that have gone to all 4 classes get a certificate today. We're going to take your picture. Our very first graduate for the evening is Angelica Hernandez. There you are. Take a picture. Thank you. Congratulations. And we also have Jaime Hernandez. You are very welcome. Congratulations. Thank you. Okay, we have Berlin Antonell. Berlin. There she comes. Did I say your name correctly? Yeah. Congratulations. Okay, we have Estella Vargas. Ah, Estella. Want to get up? Okay. Congratulations. Here's your certificate. Okay, and last but not, oh no, there's 2 more. Our next one is Maria Reyes. Thank you so much. Okay. And our next one is Elena Vasquez. All right. Thank you. Congratulations. And our last but certainly not least is Miriam Gomez. Congratulations. Good job. I enjoyed this class. Oh, good. I'm glad. Thank you so much. Okay. appreciate it very much. And thank you so much, and go and happy garden.
Solo quería agregar que les queremos agradecer a los Master Gardeners por venir aquí, tomar su tiempo completamente gratuito para dar la clase a todos ustedes. Y no se acaba aquí, vamos a tener talleres extras, como les hemos dicho, para los que están interesados. Y nos veremos todos junio 1. Randy va a estar dando un taller de dónde plantar sus plantas en su jardín, cómo juntar ciertas plantas juntas y todo ese tipo de cosas. Junio 1, ¿ok? No se les olvide esa fecha.